Let's go ahead and read verses 27 to 38. Some of the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. "Teacher," they said, "Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves him a wife, but no children, the man must marry the widow and have children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman and died childless. The second and the third married her, and in the same way the 7 died, leaving no children. Finally the woman died too. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her?" Jesus replied, "The people of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of taking part in that age and in the resurrection from the dead will neither marry nor be given in marriage, and they can no longer die, for they are like angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. But in the account of the bush, even Moses showed that the dead rise, for he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, Isaac, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for to him all are alive." I was on the phone the other day with my mom talking about my niece, who is going to a retreat camp for youth this weekend. For the past 3 days, she has been spending time with other kids her age, focused on worship and study. As is the custom for this event, it was suggested that I email her a letter giving her encouragement and praise. But I wondered, what would I say? Well, I could say, well, you're making good choices. Have a spiritually uplifting time, you're a good person, and so on. And all of those things are true, and they're possibilities, but the one thing that kept coming up to my mind over and over is how different life is going to be when she gets home. When the rubber hits the road, and school, and friendships, and relationships, and so on. So instead, the email took a different turn. It moved towards a reflection. Faith worthy of the resurrection would look like, would sound like, would feel like what? That would be the question that she could chew on. For the Sadducees and all their apprehension and hidden motives in encountering Christ, this ridiculous question they posed really didn't get them anywhere. Christ remained a mystery. Their question aims to keep the Lord at arm's length, not draw him close. But Jesus sees through their silly question, and as it turns out, what really comes out in the midst of all of this isn't a situation about a woman that loses 7 husbands. What really comes out about this is that the resurrection is a certainty for those who are considered worthy. Jesus' statement got me to thinking about worthiness and what it means to be worthy to attain the resurrection. You know, worthiness is a difficult concept to grasp. When we look at items and we look at their price, we have to question its true worth to us. If it's worth it, we'll sacrifice to get it. If not, we put it back. For those things we purchase or sell, those things we part with or we keep, we would be wise to remind us that we have, or what we are getting rid of, reflects its true worth deep within our heart. For all of us here today, in the midst of so many competing interests around us, something that is truly worthy touches us passionately and deeply. For me as a young man, I had a great many interests and hobbies: church, family, work, football, music, bikes, golf, television, reading, and so on. From one day to the next, I was always on the go. I often shared that I was proud that I spent so much time interested in so many things. I felt like it made me a well-rounded character. And it worked for a while. But as I moved on in life, I have slowly come to find out that my unwillingness to count only a few things as worthy of my time reflected the worth of all of those things in my heart. And it hindered the one thing that mattered most, my relationship and my closeness to Jesus Christ. As my heart was changed, I saw my relationship and my faith in God as more worthy to me of my time and other influences. And I want to make this clear. It's not me coming from the perspective of me having worth to God. It comes from the perspective of God having worth to me. But it isn't fun sometimes. The apostles saw it firsthand. In Acts chapter 5, verse 41, it reads, "The apostles left the Sanhedrin, rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name." And in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 5, all this is evidence that God's judgment is right, and as a result, you will be counted worthy of the kingdom of God for which you are suffering. It's interesting that the topic was centered around a hypothetical marriage. People use marriage to joke about so much suffering, probably because it isn't all glitz and glamour. And reflecting on the passage that a magazine about marriage wrote, a great marriage challenges. It takes compromise. It takes patience. It takes forgiveness, and a whole lot more. It's a playground for mistakes to be made, to create lasting wounds, betrayals that bruise the soul, and for levels of intimacy that bring blessings and great burdens. Think about it. You have two broken people wanting to live a life together. You have a potential mess. The old adage is true. Love is a dream. Marriage is the alarm clock. Marriage is tough. It ebbs and flows. It asks much. There are great joys and pains and great sacrifices when living with another person in a covenant relationship. Perhaps it sometimes seems better to stay single. That being said, let's remember that not all people are called to marriage. Some people may not be in a marriage for a number of reasons. And you know what? That's okay. Even the Apostle Paul suggested that it might be better, if possible, to remain in a state of singleness. But even in this singleness, it too provides a challenge to think in a way, to have faith that gives our relationship with God worth. A faith worthy of the resurrection. In marriage and in singleness, with spouse, friends, strangers, God's worth to us will reflect in our relationships, especially when times are tough. With anyone we come into contact, we would do well to reflect on what a life of faith looks like. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? A life of faith. To have that deep internal love for God and to let it seep out of you, to let it drip from you. What does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that feel like? You know, in all of this, Jesus certainly doesn't draw too much attention to marriage, though because he was asked about it, he touches on it, and his answer is far more reaching. His mind is occupied towards something greater. Greater in importance, greater in focus, and greater in worth. In the end, the one thing that matters is a living faith worthy of the resurrection. Doing so, living in that way, is hard, nothing short of a miracle. In fact, I got online, and I wanted to see what the shortest marriage really was. And the shortest one I could find was 55 hours. Guess what the longest marriage was that I could find online? 97 years. Now, Makes me wonder how old they were. That was in the late 1800s. Living in a way of faith that permeates our lives, that drips from us, that is relational in so many ways, that's viable, it's hard. It's nothing short of a miracle. A pastor one day was talking with a group of kids about the crucifixion of Jesus. And the pastor spoke about Jesus being dead and laid in a grave behind a rock. He also told them about Jesus' prediction that he would be raised from the grave on the third day. And as the children listened to this sad and terrible story, the pastor moved on to talking about the resurrection, a miracle, and how Jesus was nowhere to be found when the stone was rolled back. The pastor paused and wondered aloud what Jesus was thinking as he escaped. I know, a little girl said. Ta-da! That's the best joke I've got in here. Recently, we had a funeral here for a member of our church, Rosie Jansen, and this woman had been a believer for a number of years prior to her death. And when I spoke with the family members about her over and over again, I was told that she was ready to go. She was ready to go. She was looking forward to it. Isn't that interesting? It's interesting to hear them say that because death ranks among the top scariest parts of a person's life. Over and over, I had wondered about that. What it takes to have this deep internal faith that allows you to say, you are ready to go. You're ready to move on. To know that you're actually looking forward to it. For those who welcome the next chapter in their life, the confidence in the resurrection is not a mystery. It is known. For this woman, I experienced her faith. I saw it, I heard it, and I felt it. Her relationship with God guided her relationship with others. You know the resurrection is a guarantee. Jesus says so. It's funny that the Sadducees use part of the Bible against Jesus, and Jesus takes it and throws it right back in their faces. They simply didn't get what they were talking about. You know, the Sadducees, they didn't believe in the resurrection. And that's sad, you see. Oh my gosh, and that's sad, Sadducee. Never mind. But as Jesus shows them that from part of the scriptures in Exodus, the resurrection is actually in there. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 6, God says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Notice he said, I am. Not I was in the past tense, but that he still is. For those worthy of the resurrection, life moves on. The things of this world will pass away, and far greater things are in store for those who are considered worthy of the resurrection. The question of what a faith worthy of the resurrection would look like, what it would sound like, what it would feel like, is the most telling question of all. A life lived in loving obedience to God that allows us to draw near to Him, to experience Him, to live for Him with everybody we come in contact with. Much like the Christian retreat my niece is attending, and for those of you here in the church, worship right now is easy. But as you leave, that's when it gets difficult. That's where the rubber hits the road. So this is the question of the day. This is the question I pose to you. A faith worthy of the resurrection looks like what? It sounds like what? And it feels like what? The answer is up to you. But in asking the question as compared to the question of the Sadducees, I suspect you'll find a closer, deeper, and more intimate relationship with the one of infinite worth, one worthy of the resurrection. Amen.